So we had a big client that we took from the data center and brought them into AWS. And just to give you an idea of what the project kind of consisted of and how big the project was, we migrated over 100 VMs using MGN. Dozens of databases were moved to RDS. There were several hundred terabytes of on-premise NAS moved over, which is going to be the focus point today. And then on top of that, an Active Directory, which is a greenfield, completely from scratch up. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the bubble that we use all the time in the further slides. So kind of gives you an idea of the project. So historically, we have used FSx for Windows. This was the first time that we had dived in to kind of see how that might fit for this project, but we decided to use NetApp this time. And the reasons we did that was the customer is very conscious on cost, and due to the size of the infrastructure, it was going to be a crazy cost doing Windows for FSx. So one of the biggest factors for exploring NetApp was due to the massive savings, as we talked. This product, unlike FSx Windows, gives you a lot more features, and one of the biggest things is throughput. So if you've ever used the Windows FSx, you know that throughput is very expensive. The NetApp throughput allows you to move that on the fly without actually having to move the data. Additionally, baked into the product, there's also multi-AZ. So you have different options on the redundancy level that you want to put into play. And then the biggest cost savings of all is you can have cold storage. So you have a small portion of SSD that you use for hot items, and everything else can be moved on a schedule to cold storage. And then we'll let Matt talk a little bit about.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So Nick will cover or has covered the highlights, and I'll just dive a little bit deeper quickly. So what is it if you're not familiar with FSx for NetApp ONTAP? It's a fully managed AWS service. So NetApp and AWS came to be partners in this endeavor. NetApp supplies the storage operating system, the same one that's been in the market and under development for the past 30 years. So quite a mature product, right? Mature offering with AWS's scale, native management or fully managed offering. And so it fits into the FSx family of services. While it's in the FSx family, which is traditionally file services, it also can handle block protocol, right? So iSCSI and NVMe over TCP if you have that need. So why do customers pick this? I would say first and foremost, it's multi-protocol, right? So instead of using EBS, EFS, FSx Windows to cover the gambit of most common protocols, you can merge it all into one system. With that, you get petabyte scale, you get the performance that Nick mentioned, and you get cost savings due to the SSD hot tier and capacity tier, which auto tiers. In addition to that, you get everything ONTAP has to offer, right? So there's cloning for databases. If you have 5 different QA, sandbox, test, dev test, et cetera, production, you can have clones of that for testing purposes without making full copies. Efficient snapshots. The other nice part is with replication, you can have US East 1, for example, and West 2, or UK, and you can cache data, replicate your data. So quite flexible. And the nice part is it's the same platform, no matter the region, right? So it's the same APIs. You could use Terraform, CloudFormation, what have you, to manage all those different instances and make sure all your staff and projects get done efficiently. Some of these are a bit redundant from the last slide, but the 2 areas that I think are important to cover here is under security and then also mobility, right? I highlighted the mobility piece, but I think this is important. So from a security standpoint, NetApp makes the claim that we're the most secure storage on the planet. You could test, but the nice part here is SnapLock compliance. SnapLock is our term for worm. So if you're a financial services customer, regulated industry of any kind, You can have compliant snapshots and retain that for 7 to 10 years, no issue. Those will tier to the capacity pool as well. So you're getting better cost for those long-term copies. The other piece is NetApp has something called autonomous ransomware protection. So this looks at data entropy and anomalies that's on the file system itself. So this is not a replacement for Fortinet, Palo Alto, other security solutions, but at a data layer, if things are changing, right, you want to be able to immediately take a snapshot, a recoverable copy with the least amount of blast or least amount of impact to your environment. So that's built into the system at no additional charge, right? So between compliant copies, autonomous ransomware protection, the ability to integrate with Sophos, Trend Micro, Darktrace from a scan perspective on files, you ultimately have a quite robust data security aspect to your environment, right? So if you think about, you have perimeter with traditional firewalling companies or AWS tools, at some point you want to protect your data layer too, right? So that's all built in at no additional charge. The other piece is mobility and copies, right? If you have staff in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and you need that data closer to those individuals, right? If you think about CAD files or anything else that's large, there's a caching feature built into this, right? So you could cache region to region and have simple data management from that perspective. Snapshots, every volume has snapshots, right? They're efficient snapshots. And while I don't say this is a replacement for a true backup solution like AWS Backup, Commvault, Veeam, et cetera, these are fully restorable snapshots, right? So if you wanted to have your primary system in US East 1, for example, and then replicate some snapshot volume to a different region, you can now have a recoverable copy in a different region in the event there's an issue in US East 1, right? So I think those are very important. And then I know Nick is going to talk about all the other benefits for this customer. But again, I want to just call those out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Nick. If there's further questions at the end of the presentation, feel free to ask if they pertain to the service. One of us will be able to answer it.
All right, so we're kind of going to go over the migration approach now that we took for this customer. So this customer here was using an Isilon along with 2 other NAS solutions that we had to migrate over. The migration solution that we decided to use was DataSync. So DataSync, we put agents out in the customer's VMware. We had 4 agents sitting there. The agents were configured to point the storage data over to the new. And then with that, you could also create tasks, and then those tasks were able to revolve. My notes for this page. We also used them for incremental syncs as well. Okay, so some really cool features that we found with NetApp was one of them was the SSH and NetApp CLI. What this helped us with was rejoining AD. So we had to change an encryption method, and when we did that, we had to rejoin that back to AD, and that allowed us to do it. It also allowed us to do diagnostics and repairs for connectivity. And then it also, verification replication status was great. So it turned kind of a managed service into a debug tool. So it allowed us to do that. Permission management via CLI. So this also was CLI, but we pushed almost all the permissions. So like as we mentioned earlier, AD was a greenfield environment. So this data literally came over. So 600 terabytes came over with no permissions. So all those permissions had to be created and pushed. And all of that was done via the CLI, much faster. Like if you had to do this on a Windows server, like you did back in sysadmin day, you would have never got done. Probably would have taken months. So that was one of the biggest features that we used that really worked out well for us. And then The next feature that we used a lot was called Flex Clone. So at Clean Slate, we do this thing called a bubble, where we have a completely isolated environment that we can do all of our production, testing, QA, all that. And in order for that to function, we have to have up-to-date data. So we were able to use Flex Clone and its tools to do point-to-point snapshots in just minutes, if not seconds in some cases. And that allowed us to have the end users be able to test via production without actually affecting production. So it's kind of a cool technology we use at Clean Slate. Lessons learned, definitely a ton of additional configuration options versus Windows FSx. The cold storage that we talked about, the throughput, you can start all the way down at like 384 and you can take it almost up to, I think it's 6. And then we talked about the hot and cold ratio. So that saves you a ton of money. The deduplication was huge too. The level of dedupe that it does is quite amazing. Multi and single was big for that particular customer because redundancy was huge. They were a very regulated customer. They couldn't have downtime, et cetera. So that really made a difference. Talked about the CLI access, and then Flex Clone enabled us to do the cloning easily. And then DataSync worked really well with the customer because we had to resync the data multiple times. So the project went on for a long time. We were resyncing it all the time. So we had those jobs running on a schedule. And then even after cutover, we still used DataSync for some of the stuff they needed as they were doing their divestiture. We used some of that data for that as well. Real quick, we have a continue the conversation link here. You can get all of our presentation downloads, speaker info, et cetera at that as well. And then tomorrow we are actually doing a call in the afternoon from 3:30 to 5. Okay. That's also in that as well. So if you guys have more questions or if you want to geek out with us, feel free to join that. We'd love to hear from you.